Hi, and welcome to the video that's going to show you how to actually move data from Arive through Zapier into Salesforce. Now, if you are a programmer, there might be a better way to do this, but for those of us who are small brokerages, can't spend a bazillion dollars on hiring somebody else to actually do the coding, this is an actual solution that you can implement now and you can perhaps refine later. I went through hours and hours and hours, hundreds of hours trying to figure this out. So this is actually the distilled version to tell you how it actually works without having to suffer through all the pain and torture that I went through myself. Because I was looking everywhere, used every AI tool I could, and it's been kind of like a mix and then actually figuring things out on my own. So basically what we're looking at is taking data from Arive through Zapier into Salesforce. Now we have to use Zapier because there's no other program that Arive allows to connect. And what data will it export? So this is the different data fields that it says it will export. Now this isn't all of them, and I will show you this in a little bit, but in Zapier, you actually see that there's a lot of other fields that could potentially go in there. But for the most part, the majority of the fields that you're going to need are available with a couple of exceptions. And this is one of the things that really hit me when I made the transition. So one of the reasons I didn't want to do this to begin with, and why it took me a while, is because I didn't want to spend the money to upgrade to Arive Pro, which you have to in order to make this work, in order to connect to Zapier, and I didn't want to pay for Zapier. Well, after having used for dataloader.io for over a year, it broke or something went weird, and now it just wouldn't upload, and it was very frustrating, and I didn't have the time to figure out what little bug was messed up, so I just finally bit the bullet. I upgraded Pro, it gave me some other capabilities I was looking for, and then I'm paying for Zapier. So this is the solution. Once you get to that point, if you don't want to pay for those, you can export it through a CSV file and use a third party. There's different Salesforce uploaders. You're still going to have to create your flow in order to populate everything, but if you're going to automate everything, this is the way to do it. Now, the key to know here, and the reason that I bring this up is because there are three things that I find important that it does not export. First of all, it will not export a social security number through Zapier. It will not export the year of birth. It'll give you the date, the day of birth, and the month of birth, but it will not give you the year, and it will not get you the FICO. And when I kind of complained about that, it was basically for, liability purposes, and they didn't want a third-party entity having access to those pieces of data for security purposes. Okay, fine. So there's other ways that we can get that, and there's three pieces of data that I might need that I can plug in really quick, and it's inconvenient, but it's not a showstopper. Okay, so that begs the question of how do we actually differentiate it, because I was using a social security number as a unique identifier. So then actually I kind of walked through the process, and I realized anytime that I enter a lead into Arive, they use the email address. So the email address is what I went with, and that's how I built it. Now, just to kind of continue on, once it comes into Zapier, this is the Zap, and I'll open this up a little bit later so you can see it, but it's really pretty simple. So it's basically saying, hey, anytime a loan status is updated, which is here, so moving it from app intake to qualification, anytime that is updated, then it's going to trigger this, and then it's going to launch the flow. All right, so and this is called it's a loan status update, but then it goes into the flow itself. Now the flow, this is an auto launch flow. When I was exporting it as a CSV file and uploading it through dataloader.io, it was a trigger flow, and trigger flows operate different than auto launch flow. So this is an auto launch flow. I'm going to kind of walk you through how it's built and what it does, but the ultimate goal is so that it will create an account, it'll create an opportunity, and it will create a residential loan application. So just to kind of walk you through the flow framework, and then I'll back up and show you what I had to do in order to make this work. And then we'll get to the last piece, which was the percentages, which was really kind of a pain in the butt. And I'll explain that in a bit. At any rate, so when I change it from any of these statuses, then it creates what's called a Zap, and the Zap just exports everything that I have created, and it moves it into here. So first of all, it's the auto launch flow. It starts, and then it's going to reach out and get the person count by name and email. It's going to actually get the record, and then it's going to say, hey, is it found or not? And if it is found, then it will assign that existing account ID that I already have assigned to it in Salesforce. If it's not, it's going to create the person account. Then it's going to get the contact information and it's going to assign a new account ID. Once it does that, then it's going to update the borrower record. So it's going to ask, hey, is there a co-borrower? If there is a co-borrower, then it's going to get that information from the co-borrower and it's going to say, hey, does it exist? Yes, it does. And then it will update any information on the account. If it doesn't exist, it's going to create an account. And it's going to get those records again and then relate that co-borrower to the main buyer. Okay. So that way that those two have a related record in Salesforce. If there is no co-borrower, then it just meets down here and it gets records again in order to see, hey, does that have a loan application? If it has a loan application, then it updates that loan application. If it doesn't have a loan application, it creates it and then it updates it. And this is where a lot of my data is actually stored, is in the application. I'll show you that in a minute. And then it'll get records again. And then basically to say, hey, does it have an opportunity? If an opportunity does exist, it updates that opportunity. And that's typically where you see our status is in the opportunity. If it doesn't, then it creates an opportunity and then it ends on both sides. So really what this does is it will either bring in new data or create new data, new accounts, and then update those accounts. So in hindsight, relatively simple. In order to make this work, there's a lot to do. So let's talk about architecture to begin with. So, or understanding how stuff flows in here. Now, I thought when I started out, and I paid a lot of money for somebody else to build another flow for me, I thought, and the way they explained to me is like all this data comes in, it goes into like a bucket, and then in that bucket, they send the different information out. So I thought it was all going into the account, and sitting in the account in the background, and then that data would then be mapped to different fields in Salesforce. Well, that's not how it works. It works more like those coin machines. So if you've ever dumped a bunch of coins and seen them kind of go through the zigzag and then drop in the coin slots, it's kind of how this works. So as the data leaves Arive, goes through Zapier, it's mapped to certain fields, comes in, and it kind of goes and drops into those slots that we actually have to create. And in Salesforce, those are called variables. So for every single thing, every single point of data that you actually want to put into Salesforce, you have to create a variable here that acts as basically a container. So all of these are fields that I had to contain. I tried to go every which way I could to get around this until I realized that, especially in an auto flow, there has to be a place for it to actually hold the content. And that's what the variables are. So the variables are like, as those coins drop in, they're like little placeholders. So when you have, dates or, loan to value or whatever, any data point that you want, you have to actually create a place for it to go in and go bloop and store. Once it's in there and you have these variables, now throughout this entire flow, you can then reference that the entire time. And when you do that, that's when it comes down to if we were to update an application, then you'll see how everything is actually mapped out. So all of these fields of information that you would see in Salesforce have the variable value that it's mapped to. So conceptually pretty easy. In hindsight, difficult in the beginning, and it's also a lot of work to do. So, trying to avoid it, really spend a lot of time. But at the end of the day, create the variable, export, it imports, it drops in the variable, and then you can reference the variable the entire time. And that's really how everything is built in here. And that's how it then populates, right? So with each of these, you do the same exact thing, depending on where it's at. You can do the same thing for the opportunity, and select what data you actually want to go in there. And you see there's less data that is required in there. That was something I learned structurally I didn't need. And same thing with the account. Like when you're initially building an account, this is co-borrower information. So it's like, well, it really makes you think about what information do you really need? Do you need every single piece of data, or are you just looking for something very specific, right? And that is, pretty much the key to being able to structure, your data in Salesforce itself, and also when you're going to pull reports. So knowing where that data is going and how it is mapped really informs the future on how you're pulling your reports and where you're storing your data and what are you getting. So when you strip it all down, it makes it a little bit easier that way. Now, what do we have here in Zapier? So when you export it, you actually have to map it all in Zapier. So if you look at this, this is where everything is actually mapped. So every single thing that I created has to be mapped. So these are all the variables that I had to create. And then these are what actually comes out of Zapier itself, out of Arive itself. So you have to map them. I'm just closing that because I don't know what data it's pulling from. But you have to map them all like that. So then you actually have to open them up and see the variable and then match it and then use this and see is it exactly what you wanted. And there's also test files, and you kind of have to debug it and make sure that what Arive calls it versus what Zapier calls it versus what you called it, they all line up. One of the things that it's not exporting is my mailing address, right? Which is also frustrating. So I'm going to have to manually do my mailing addresses. But it does pull their address, so you just have to see, like, when you match up the data point and the variables, what is it actually mapping to? Because sometimes the way that they're worded, it just doesn't match up. So keep that in mind. Now, the last thing that I'll show you here is, and it took me forever because when I was actually importing, this information and I wanted to get it into, and again, this is just a test file. So if it goes into the residential loan application, importing the data in here, I really wanted it to show as a percent, but it wasn't showing as a percent. It would show like 0.008, or it would round it up to like 1, or it would just really bastardize these numbers, right? And it just wouldn't work. And I use everything from ChatGPT to Copilot that's actually in Zapier, and it would create different codes, and it was trying to code and trying to anticipate, like, what is Arive doing on the export versus what is Zapier doing to the data, and how does it look at it versus how is Salesforce actually importing it. And no matter what we did, no matter what formulas we used, we couldn't actually make it work as a percentage. Now, again, if you're a massive coder, perhaps you have a way around it, but I couldn't figure it out. It took me like no kidding. It took me like 9 hours, frustrated. Finally, I just stopped, took a shower, had to think about it, and I realized, wait a minute. So no matter what, it's like two magnets, like two of the same polar, and it just kept. So I was like, wait a minute, what if I eliminate that? What if I export it as a text file? Then as it imports, it goes and I create a formula that converts the text into a percentage and then map the field to the formula. That, my friends, is the answer. That wasn't anywhere on the internet. And, I'm kind of proud of that. Super, super happy. So what it does when it comes in here is I actually created a formula. Where's my formula? Those are the variables. There's the formulas. So it converts it to converts the rate. So I had to convert each one. Each percentage, you have to create the conversion formula. So all it is, the value, and I called it a debug because it was a bug. This is a bug, so I call it the debug value. So it comes in and it just converts it to a decimal, and this is the formula. It's super simple. You can copy it and paste it in, right? And all it does is for each one of the fields, you have to create one of these formulas so that when you go into the record, let's see here, here's application. When you go in here, you have to map that to the formula. Let's see if I can find one real quick. So you just say formula. So the field is LTV debug, variable LTV debug. So I had to create the field in here, but it's not showing. So in the back of Salesforce, you have to create two fields, right? You have to create the debug field in order to bring it in, and then you have to create the conversion. So the formula right here and then I create another one that's LTV. So the LTV debug sits in the background, and I don't actually have it showing up in Salesforce, right? So when you actually go into how those are created, and you can create a field, right? So you create a field, I create the debug field, and then basically import it as a text file. And then from the text file, then I use the formula, convert the text file, and then it turns it into a percentage. And then I use the formula to map it to the field that actually does show up. Okay. So I create a debug field in the background that exists, but it's not visible, so that when it imports, it goes into there, into that variable, right? And then I use the formula to convert that text field into a percentage, and then I map the actual field that I see on there with the formula. And that is your workaround. A lot of work. It seems like that. It's really not that complicated when you actually learn and see how that works. But very important for you to know how that is a workaround for you. All right, so that is all I have on this. I mean, obviously, this could be a much longer video, but those are the quick solutions for that. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, have an amazing day, and I hope this helps.